Hello, friends. It's me again. And this is the finale of this particular little story series by our friend Roku. This is Memoirs of a Beard Magnet, The Hills Have Beards finale, City Folk. So, let's get right to it. A slight warning, there are threats about firearms, trauma, and very scary people, but I swear, no matter how bad this sounds, I'm fine now. I'm right back to being tense. I was a little less tense from the last chapter. I'm right back to it now. Okay, let's just go. Okay. When the next door neighbors, who always let their cattle loose all over everyone else's property, moved away, we thought that the new neighbors from Seattle would be better. After all, we had relatives in Seattle, and there'd be some good common ground. Instead, the people who arrived were a father who wasn't so bad himself, just kind of a non-entity, a mother who was round like a beach ball, not exactly normal fat, but round, as if filled with the blueberry juice and not yet pressed out by the Oompa Loompas. Her hair was maroon, short and curly, and her face was sort of tomato red, usually angry, with a permanent scowl and the pressurized look of someone about to blow either their temper or a blood vessel. Jeez. These new neighbors came with some weird idea that the law didn't apply to them outside of a major city, and that rural equals guns for everyone. They carried guns frequently, even the boys who were 14 and 16, stomping around like pseudo-soldiers on duty at some kind of survivalist prepper camp. Oh, lordy. The mother would have angry, screaming fits at people driving or walking past and completely minding their own business. She got into her insane, crap-filled proto-Karen head that no one else but her family should go onto the public road between the lake and the houses that we all had to use to get to and from our own homes. Oh, lovely. They immediately took up violent vendettas against anyone for just about any trivial or ridiculous reason. The kids, who were egged on by their parents' attitudes, started a one-sided campaign to vandalize other places, to make threats against neighbors, attack their pets, like they did to my dog and cat, oh my god, and in general make life hell for everyone. When anyone reported the problems, the unhelpful sheriff's office suggested we all just try to get along. Gee, thanks. Sure we didn't think of that. The half-dozen other neighbors, a few miles off the farm and woods, decided that law enforcement simply didn't want to deal with these dangerous people for the sake of a few nobody hicks like us. We all had to be on guard anytime they were around, and I witnessed the sickening way they would treat their animals, like tying a dead cat around their dog's neck. What kind of horrible serial killer shit is this? And once, while I hid in the trees on my side of the wire fence, I saw one of the 14-year-old boys take a smoldering stick from a slash pile and burn their cow on her udder with it as he chased her around trying to burn her again until she kicked him and ran away into the trees. Yep, that guy deserves a face full of hoof. Fuck that little creep. In the midst of this, my father was suddenly killed in an accident at work. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. That's terrible. My mother and I were suddenly alone with these people just across the fence from us. I had to walk past them daily to go to school and listen to their threats that I would soon be parentless. Real fucking classy. They would sometimes sick their dogs on me, threaten me physically, and mock my father's recent passing. Well, aren't they just fucking lovely? For a 12-year-old, already dealing with mild Asperger's, there's no words to describe the effect all of this had on myself and my mother. My mother, who was too stressed to help at all at this point. I just checked out emotionally and socially. I had nothing to say to anyone except what I absolutely had to say. I started to experience the world as a remote interaction, like I was performing all functions through a heavy glass wall. My few exchanges with others became more geeky and awkward, and sometimes unintentionally hurtful. One day I walked towards home to find my mother in a standoff between one of the teenage boys and his brother walking from our fence while she just stood outside of it where she had been pruning the rose hedge. She held a thick rosebush stem in her hand to defend herself as the boy held up a bullet yelling that it had her name on it and they were going to shoot her and make her kid an orphan if we didn't move out. I don't actually remember hearing what they said would happen to me after that, and I don't remember much other than my mother raised one rose cane and took a step at them, and they backed off and ran home. We did end up moving, and ultimately the people who bought the place ended up selling it to those neighbors, one of whom still lives there. The place on the reservation that we moved to had its own bad neighbors, issues, and high strangeness too, but nothing was quite like these people. Taking a step back, a weird little piece of good and all the crazy awfulness was a fist fight I had one day with their middle girl who was my age. She ambushed me on the road after school. I was small and had some breathing and blood disorders, but I held up my end of the fight, despite me bleeding all over the place. When we decided we were done enough, we stopped and started talking. During the conversation, she said, "My mother's insane and I hate her." Of course, she was just acting on orders. We talked for a long time, made a plan. We actually wanted to like each other. So we set up a routine where we'd walk to and from school together while we were out of sight of her house. Then we'd take turns, with one going ahead of the other when we were in view of the house, so her parents wouldn't guess we were actually friends. Some people, especially now during the pandemic, think that the country setting would be some kind of idyllic place with polite people and 1950s family show values. But you should be warned that rural does not equal safe. Whew, boy. Yeah, no, that's, 100% on that. Rural does not equal safe. That should be pretty obvious by some of the things that I've told you guys. I live in the middle of nowhere, and it sucks. It's not the kind of place that I would ever advise anyone going to unless you really had to. This whole story is just wild as fuck, and I'm glad that you were able to become friends with this girl, but she does already acknowledge her family's insanity, and that's some hardcore mental illness right there. Just, we can do whatever we want once we move out to the country, no one will ever stop us, that kind of shit. Fuck that, that's crazy. And the fact that the cops were just so fucking pathetic, they wouldn't go out there and do anything, like, really, guys? Fucking lame. Like, at that point, why even become a cop? You're not going to serve, you're not going to protect. Why did you do it again? Like, what's the point? Because of a paycheck? You can get a better paycheck somewhere else where somebody else might not shoot at you. That's ridiculous. Assholes. That's basically what that is. That's just self-serving assholes. So, Jesus. Oh, that's a wild-ass story, I'll tell you that. Living out here, I've had to deal with that kind of shit, too. The house next door to mine, which has been empty for a long time, has been broken into at least 7 times in the past month. Yeah, they're like right next to my house. I'm surprised they didn't try to come into my office while I'm out here working. I'm hoping that maybe they realize that, somebody is in here and they wouldn't come in here. But, that may also just be wishful thinking. There's no way of really telling. I did have a bunch of things stolen. That has happened multiple times out here. And that is kind of a thing. Like, you don't really think about... I mean, much like Roku said, you think that these kind of, like, country settings are, like this 1950s family show kind of values. But no, especially in places like this, where, like, the drug abuse rate is incredibly high, the mental illness rate is incredibly high, and that doesn't help with the drug abuse. And, like, the fact that out here, it's not that the police don't care, because I've had to call them several times. It's that they are wildly stretched thin. Where I live is technically outside of the city limits of where the P.O. box in the, description thing is. And I have to go into town to get the mail. So out here, it's not, the city police will show up. It's the sheriff's department. And the sheriff's department is, anytime I've interacted with them, they've been incredibly kind. They've been really nice, very professional. But it has gotten to the point that, like I said, with all these break-ins, when I have to call them now, they just know who I am. Because there's so few officers that when they show up, they just recognize me. And that's it's kind of a good and bad thing at the same time. Like, it's good to know that, like, you know, these guys are that nice and they are gonna do their best to help people, but it's also bad to know, like, wow, there's like 15 of you guys max, and it should be more in like the 20s, 30s, probably 40s, honestly, in order to properly patrol and make sure everything's okay out here. But that is absolutely not something they could even afford if they wanted to. It's just not. Out here is the only time I have ever lived in a place where I've seen police cars that are actually on-duty units that the decals are sun-faded because they simply cannot afford to, you know, re-up the paint and the decals and all that kind of stuff. And that's usually what you do. When we lived in Thibodeau, that was what the department did. After a while, they would just kind of go in and reset the stuff and you know, make sure it still stayed very, very obvious. You know, everything's bright and crisp and it looks very professional. But if you ain't got no money, then I guess you just don't do that. And it's wild. I honestly have never seen that. It's super strange, but I mean, that's kind of the life when you live out in the middle of nowhere. So I kind of feel a lot of this, like the stories Roku has told through all of these, I can definitely relate to a lot of this. Living out here is weird, and it's very it's very surreal. You don't expect it. You don't expect it to be as weird as it is, but yeah, no, it really is. But that's the end of this story. Thanks everybody for being here. This was one hell of a little series, and thank you, Roku, for sending this in. And if you'd like to send in your own story, you can do that. You can send it to my subreddit, r/Moonhorse Stories. I check it pretty much every day, so I'll see it. I have a Ko-Fi, and I have a merch store. You should check those out. Also, you know, the YouTube thing, like, comment, subscribe, but I've made mention of the address. All that stuff is in the drop-down box. I do get mail. If you want to send me weird things in the mail, I'll open them on camera. It's a thing I do sometimes. Either way, I love you all so very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye, everybody.